You started?
Hey, community.
We are
1, 2.
Comic Talk, and we know that this is a Wednesday. We know that this is a little off schedule. That doesn't matter for us. It doesn't matter for you.
Off schedule, I feel it. Well, we scheduled a lot of stuff just for the next week.
We did. We have 8 things scheduled in 7 days. And that's not even including what we may do as far as the thespian theater and maybe another box opening Friday. But more importantly, let's get to today.
We have Brandon Easton, special guest.
We do. But for right now, we have a co-host that we always have because this person is an extreme help for us. If it wasn't for her.
Christy Shint, who's been here
pretty much day one. So, Christy, thank you for being here with us. We appreciate you. We know that you have a busy schedule ahead of you today, so thank you for fitting us in.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just oh yeah, this. So I have to but it's like kind of like a exercise to get back into the swing of things. So There you go. Hey, Discovery Bay, what's up?
Hey, we got JB with us. Hey, appreciate you, JB. I hope everything worked out with you. I know you had to cancel today's show, so sorry. But I hope everything is well. Back to today's show. Today's show is a special show of Artist Alley. The reason why is we have Mr. Brandon Easton. Now, Kai and I have been trying to see this gentleman almost since the beginning of the year when he first released this Marvel Action Spider-Man. Now, we know that it's, I'm more of the kid stuff. He reads more of the horror and gore stuff. It seems kind of ironic, but I bought this mostly for me. And because of their current situations, this other book did drop in time, which is Kai, tell the community.
Judge Dredd.
And this is the one that he and I really love. It's not to say that we didn't like this one. It's just to say that this was something that we really saw eye to eye, and we had a lot to talk about on this book. But as opposed to really doing that, we thought it would be easier to just simply bring the gentleman who wrote it. So this person, before we bring him on, I mean, this individual is extremely accomplished. And Christy, you know this. I mean, you know Brandon.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is an individual, as you well know. I mean, he's a professional writer, screenwriter, educator, but out of LA, but originally born out of the Baltimore, Maryland area. And there, he not only received all his education, but he actually taught for years in the Harlem area for like 6 years. I mean, I could go on and on, but I would rather bring this individual in. I just want to touch base on mostly his education, because how he applies all this information to his writing. So without further ado, Mr. Brandon Easton, thank you very much for joining us this morning, sir.
Good morning, folks. How are you?
Doing good. Doing good. Just been running around.
I know the feeling.
Hey, I know I touched on just a few. I mean, when I was going through some of your bio stuff, my God, I mean, you are so accomplished in the background of the educational field that it does translate into your writing, as far as what I feel, one, how I feel that you're approaching your stuff, and two, to the extent in which that you are researching what you put into what you write. You know, I mean, you give me the impression that if you want to do anything on marine biology, you're going to sit there and ask people in the community, hey, can you give me information that I may not know?
Yes, all the time.
And I appreciate that, because it does translate into writing. So as opposed to me keep jumping ahead, can you please bring the community up to speed on, one, who Mr. Brandon Easton is, and two, some of the projects that you are working up to this point?
Okay, well, like you said, I'm born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. I lived in a couple of places on the East Coast, mainly because of college. I went to college in Ithaca, New York, which is, for people who are not from the East Coast, the same town as Cornell University. I lived in Boston for a few years, and when I was living in Boston, that's when I really started to make my push into breaking into the comic book business. That town is a very big sci-fi town. It always has been for a long time, particularly with Star Trek and Star Wars and stuff like that. So I learned a lot about how to break in and how not to break in during my time in Boston, and I made some pretty massive mistakes, which I could talk about, when we talk about people wanting to break into the business and stuff like that. But in terms of educational stuff, I went to grad school at Boston University, and then I moved to New York City, and I taught in public school in New York City. I actually taught in Harlem and the Bronx. Middle school I did. Middle school is like hell on earth for teachers, so I don't ever want to do that again, because middle school, good God. That was an interesting time. And after that, I moved to Los Angeles in about 2008 to break into screenwriting. But the thing is, I've been writing, and I'd actually broken into comics in 2002 over at Dreamwave, Pat Lee's old company. I did a series with LaShawn Thomas called Arcanium, and then I did some Transformer stuff. And to answer your question directly, I have a background in sociology. I have a background in history. I grew up a science nerd. So I always try to apply that stuff because, when you think about people like George R.R. Martin or Tolkien or, Arthur C. Clarke or Robert Heinlein,
Wow, you keep pulling names out of the hat that are, near and dear to me.
Right.
I mean, you're pulling everything.
Yeah. Or Ursula Le Guin. There's all these folks who they meld real history and real economics and real politics into their stories. They say that, Lord of the Rings is really about World War I. They say, well, obviously, Game of Thrones is the War of the Roses, which, George R.R. Martin took and twisted up a bit and added all the, dragons and stuff to it. But
sure.
You'll notice that the stuff that really, really sticks is stuff that pulls in real world, concepts. I mean, when you look at Star Wars, and I love Star Wars, but Star Wars is a ripoff of Dune for all intents and purposes. Frank Herbert's Dune. I mean, if you ever read Dune or look at like the imagery in it, it's basically Star Wars. Literally. I mean, it's not even hidden. Even some names and places. So.
Well, and then they ripped off like other movies, apparently, like The Fortress. It's like that's them.
Oh, the Hidden Fortress, yeah.
Right, the last one.
So when you look at and Dune itself is a story of Middle East oil politics.
Exactly. Most people don't even realize that. It's precisely what it is.
The hilarious thing is that the hotbed of oil on Earth has been Iraq for a very long time.
Yeah.
And the planet in Dune is called Arrakis. So I mean,
right. Yeah, there was no
it's changed. It's changed like Arrakis, like that.
Arrakis. So it should be Iranus, or Saudi Arabia's, But so that's what I do. I try to bring in real world politics and real world situations so that I think people, even the biggest science fiction and fantasy fans, they want to feel the emotion. And you don't get more emotional than what's going on in the world around you, because it affects you. Regardless of what side of the political spectrum you fall on, you can still care if people in your family are eating or not. You can still care if you have shelter, whether or not you're conservative or liberal, whatever you want to call it. Shelter is an important thing, and the loss of shelter will affect anybody, regardless of what you believe in. So
security.
When you bring in, deprivation, you bring in not slavery itself, but concepts of oppression, disenfranchisement, economic loss, all that stuff. It all comes together. A lot of people criticize George Lucas on the prequels, like The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. But what he was trying to do was bring in a real world political economic situation that would explain how a tyrant could take over a galaxy. And that whole Trade Federation nonsense, which is kind of dumb. But when you look at the application of it, you can see how Palpatine was able to take over the galaxy by using politics. You know what I mean? So it's something that we all, particularly if we take it seriously, we all try to do. That makes sense.
Now, what I'm noticing is that every time you've described these different analogies, you've always used these, sci-fi along with true historical analogies. So 2 things I want to touch on. One, I'm guessing that you're a big sci-fi fan, along with the obviousness of you writing Star Trek and working on Star Trek stuff, but also 2, your love of history and love of sci-fi directly correlate to where you seem to gravitate to tying the two together in your writing. So that's what I'm getting on and touching is, one, your love for the both of them is there, and two, you have this knack of being able to convey both. So my question is, how did you manage to be able to take these two loves and be able to convey them to an audience to where they're able to appreciate your love and actually fall in love with yours?
That would be my sociology background, because this is a long story. I mean, the short version is, I grew up in Baltimore in the 80s, and when the crack cocaine situation hit the United States, Baltimore was one of those towns that got hit really hard, alongside LA, Chicago, DC, New York,
Right.
Houston, Atlanta, and I saw neighborhoods that used to be beautiful. And I mean like all black communities or predominantly black communities with all kind of like, upper class, middle class, lower class. It wasn't like everybody was poor and destitute, right? And I watched those communities in real time go to hell, like get destroyed. So for me, watching that happen in real time and not understanding what was going on, when I got to college, the first thing I did was start studying how cities are built, how people how do human beings create communities, and when you start thinking about that, you think about all communities throughout history have been organized around economics. Like humanity stopped being hunter-gatherers and started being settled because they figured out how to grow crops. That was called the Neolithic Revolution. That was like thousands of years ago, right? So when you look at the organizing principle of any society, right, you look at the economic situation and you build from that. And I feel like I try to put in to convey these things. How do people react to the economy around them? So for Judge Dredd, Mega City 1 is a holocaust of survival. I mean, it's a horrible place to be unless you're one of the super duper rich, which is like 0.001% of their population, in Mega City, right? Very few people have money there. So
we'll never see it.
Right. But the trick is that people have figured out in that hellacious landscape to carve out a living. So my question, when I was thinking about a Judge Dredd story, we've already seen how Dredd reacts and who he is, right? But I've always wondered, if I was born in Mega City 1, how would I survive without getting into crime, right? Because apparently the joblessness there is like 80% or something, right? So what would happen? So there are always ways to make money, always. Anywhere you are on this planet, there's ways to make money. What usually stops us is a sense of morality and a fear of being arrested, usually a mixture of those two. So there's always a way to make money. So my thing is that if I was in Mega City 1 and I didn't want to like join a gang or kill people, how would I make money? So I thought about this character who shuttled illegal, contraband between the rich and the streets. And that's how he makes his money. He's not a drug dealer. He's just a courier, because it could be anything. It could be things that you're not supposed to have in Mega City 1, which is a lot of things because the laws there are ridiculous. So I thought, what would that be like? And what if, looking at some things happening in the real world, like human trafficking and all that stuff, what would happen if this person stumbled across a really nasty plot? So that would inform the story and bring in things that, if you read the New York Times or any, reputable newspaper, it's stuff that you would actually see, and read about. I didn't want to do drugs because I feel like drugs have been done to death. But if you illegally do certain things to people and you hurt people, Gundam fan, yay.
Well, that's Mark. That's Mark. Mark. That's my brother.
Mobile Suit Gundam in Japanese. There you go. So, but yeah, that's how that works. So that's how I apply. I look at what's going on in the world and try to find an emotional connection that people can think about, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Hit him with that one again. What'd you think?
I asked if he ever built a Gundam before.
It's funny
you build Gundam
because right behind me, I have hold on.
Oh, please, yeah. We love toys.
This is from one of my favorite Gundam series called Thunderbolt, and this is a kit from that series. It's getting harder and harder to find. I have tried very hard.
Oh my God, look at that.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's
sick. A high grade.
Yeah. Then when you look at it, now I'm going to open it up.
Please.
There are way too many pieces for me because I don't have that much free time here. But
if you've ever seen a second grade, my uncle built one of those.
Oh wow!
Wow,
this is what a Gundam looks like before you do anything to it. So yeah, I have a bunch of unconstructed Gundam model kits because I don't have a lot of free time. But one of these days. So yeah, I collect Gundams. What's it called? Tamashii Nations has a series of Gundam action figures, pretty decently posable. It's not perfect, great or anything, but hey, Paula. I'm very much into it, but man, I tell you, it is it's tough because there's so much Gundam out there, and Gundam is like the Star Trek of the Eastern world. Like there's so much, and I am very interested in going to Tokyo just for Gundam stuff. Yeah, and I'm always trying to. And here's another thing about Gundam that's come up. In Southern California, there's a lot of Gundam fans because I go to Little Tokyo. Well, when it was open, I used to go to Little Tokyo, and I go to Anime Expo and stuff. And there seems to be a pretty sizable Gundam population here in SoCal, but I have not found people because I just saw a build party suggestion pop up, and I agree we should do a build party.
I love that idea. You know what? We need to talk about that. We could do that.
We could actually do it at the Atomic Basement down in Long Beach,
and even virtually. You know what I mean? We can both do it as both a real and a virtual thing, and set one. Yeah, we got to talk.
Yeah, we should, because I think I would probably get a lot more done if I wasn't the only person sitting in my room by myself ripping apart a model kit. So yeah, I'm a big Gundam fan, and yes, I do collect the models. I got to build the damn things though.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And yeah, it's fun. It's that type of stuff it's a whole rabbit hole that you can go down forever. You know what I mean?
If you don't have time to build the actual ones, I like getting just a small little cute bear.
Yeah.
If the like small little bear robots.
Those are cute. You can get them in the gumball machines in Little Tokyo. They have the little ones.
They're called gachapons, I think, right? Gachapon? That's what they're called?
I don't
know. The
know.
ones that are in the bubble, and then you use the vending machine.
Right.
Oh, gachapon, yeah.
Got you. Thank you. I didn't even knew that. Cool.
Yeah, I know, because like sometimes I watch cat videos and they go ape shit over that stuff. Like, let's get all the things.
Yeah, I watch cat videos too, and they love destroying model kits, and they love those little bubbles things,
Yeah.
Pretty nice.
To get back, I guess we were just momentarily speaking about
Judge Dredd,
and I'd love to get back to there.
Sure.
Being that we were just talking, so you were starting with a question there, Kai. It was a Judge Dredd. We were. Well, basically, with your Dredd, what I want to make comment on, and then kind of have you elaborate more with, which is
when you were assigned Judge Dredd, how did you feel about it?
Yeah.
That's a long story too, but the short version over at IDW, every now and then, obviously books and titles become available. It doesn't happen often. I mean, this is true in the comic books, period. So for those who don't know, like if you're working freelance, because I don't have a contract, like a exclusive contract with anyone, and the editors there enjoy your work and trust you, they will every now and then, and it doesn't happen often, but like maybe once or twice a year, they'll say, hey, these books are available or something's available. Would you like to pitch? So I wasn't the only ones. I wasn't the only guy asked or person asked to pitch, but I came up with a couple of things, and they really liked it. Take care, Christine.
See ya. Bye. Sorry, I have to just go.
No, we understand. Thank you, Chrissy, for being here. We appreciate you.
Talk later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So what they do is so you get an email, would you like to pitch? So I sent my pitches, several of them, and what happens is they look at those and they pick the best one out of those, and then they ask for a much longer version of the one they liked. Then they do that for a bunch of people. So because Judge Dredd is not owned by IDW but licensed from 2000 AD or Rebellion or whoever they are,
right?
They send all those pitches over to England or the UK, whatever you want to call it, and then they pick the one they think would work, and they picked mine, and the rest, as they say, is history. So when I got that email, I was totally stunned because that made me the first, not the first Black person, but the first African-American writer of Judge Dredd in history.
That's rad. And you know what I wanted to touch on is cool. Your writing of the character is, to me, different in the way that when I've always read a Judge, okay, let me start over. This is the first time I've jumped back in a Dredd story. And the reason why I've left Dredd stories was Judge Dredd always seemed to be so judgy and less story that it was just all action and death and violence. And it was like, okay, but if there's a story there, then I'm in. You brought this Judge Dredd story to where there's so much depth in the story that I'm now, as we were starting to pick up in the book, I'm now going, okay, you know what? This sets up for a lot of great action because you've already built and established a good story. Now you're supporting it with action as opposed to the other way around. Your approach to this character is so different and slightly, to me, unique in its own way. And I don't know it's because of your background or not, but this is what I'm getting at. How was your approach in writing that much different to where you're able to convey it in this way?
All right. So what I wanted to do, and I mentioned this, I think I did an interview for SciFi channel of sci-fi.com, and and they asked me something similar, and I'll say the same thing. I look at Dredd. See, the thing is, with Dredd, how can I say this? Dredd and Superman are very similar because they're more about an idea than a character. Dredd is a representation of the law of that universe, whereas Superman is a representation of hope in the DC universe. So you don't need to like complicate Superman's personal life. And I think that's where some creators make a mistake, where with Superman, they overly complicate him or Clark. You don't need to do that. Just put him in a good story and like how the world reacts to him and how he reacts to the world. Sort of like Superman 1, with Christopher Reeve.
Sure.
Not so much about, you don't complicate Clark's life. He doesn't need that. So what does he do for the world? So Dredd is almost the opposite of that. He doesn't represent hope. He represents fascism and the deprivation of rights, because the law in Mega City 1 makes absolutely no sense. Like, if you really sat down and like, I've actually done this. I've looked through the Dredd RPG and like all the laws and things a person could be arrested for. Like, you could be arrested in the Dredd universe for almost anything.
Sure.
If the judge decides you did something wrong, you did something wrong. And you can't argue. They'll lock. You can't fight them. They're the judges.
Which to me is a play on how racism and everything is today. How they're just able to go ahead and
right.
just exemplify. Yeah. To me, that's. I mean, I could be way off, but that's how I've always perceived it in this dystopian style lifestyle. You know, I mean, it's just.
Yeah.
I guess it's more exemplifying and augmenting what we presently have in existence today, and it's saying, what if worst case scenario is this? You know what I mean? So I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the further we move forward in society, the closer we're getting to Mega City 1. And that's what's kind of scary to me, that I didn't even, because like my story is about immigration. Well, the B plot is the immigration riots, and we have had those basically, at some point.
Just recently.
Right. And not to mention what's happening on the borders with the detention center. But, so, to get back to the question, I'm just saying that when I thought about Dredd, I don't need to get too complicated with who he is. We know who Dredd is. If someone's going to pick up a Dredd comic, generally speaking, they have an idea of who he is and how he operates. It's not, a secret. Like, Dredd is the law. I am the law, and this is what's going to happen to you. So I approached him as just the force pursuing the character who has the information. Now, obviously, Dredd's not the villain in it, but he's also not the hero. He is the law. Like, law is neither, because what do they say? Is that the RPG alignment? I look at him as chaotic neutral.
Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah, it's like chaotic neutral. I think of Dredd as chaotic neutral because he's not evil, but he's also not good. You know, he is in the middle, and he's also brutal. Like, he has no problem killing a person.
Chaotic neutral is actually probably, yeah.
Right. So
not even true neutral because he's not even a sheriff.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah, he's chaotic neutral because he will step in and he will act heroically in certain occasions. But generally speaking, if you dropped a piece of gum on the ground in front of him, he could like actually beat you up for that, and you couldn't stop it. You know, because that's littering, and littering is an offense in Mega City 1. So that's how I approached it. I don't believe in overly complicating, because I think, and this is another topic, but it applies here. I think the real problem with American superhero comics is that we're overcomplicating their personal lives and not letting them be heroes. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need Peter Parker to be, you know, destitute. I don't need Peter Parker to be, you know, mind controlled or his brain taken over by his body taken over by Dr. Octopus. You know, you don't need to do that. Like, Peter Parker's base story, his base story is very simple. He's a guy, he's a science nerd who was never really good with girls, although women loved him. You know, he has really bad luck, but at the end of the day, he will always make a sacrifice for the right thing, no matter how much it costs him. That's Spider-Man in a nutshell. You don't need to go too far beyond that. And the minute you start going too far beyond that, the story doesn't make any sense anymore. Same thing with Batman.
Know what? I don't think that you even realize that what you've been able to do, and you've done this twice now in your explanation, is you're basically been able to state that the simplification of the character is the overall complexity of the character. And what I mean by that is Well, what I mean by that is when I used to read, let's say, Dredd, going back to Dredd, the character got a little complex and it got a little thick. And what I've noticed that in this is, like you're saying, you don't need to know too much backstory or lore of Mega City 1 or the character or anything about the universe. You have been able to take in a very easy way. I mean, it's very easy to get into the story and understand where I'm at without being overcomplicated and you know what I mean? And the simplification and the way you're telling the story is very complex. And that's what's offering the reader, I guess, the imagination and appreciation of the story. So what I'm getting at is your statements are basically stating that you can take a very complex story and simplify it and allow the reader to offer the complexity down the road by slowly feeding them, as opposed to, I guess, making their head spin every other sentence or sitting there going, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
So what I appreciate about Dredd, and I guess what I want you to get explain to the community is, how can you take such complex things and make them so simple when so many people have such a difficulty doing so?
Because, and this goes back to my earlier statements, it's more about putting people in a real world scenario. Like, okay, I'll give you an example. Now, there's some great Judge Dredd storylines where they leave Earth, and because, you know, in a Dredd universe, you know, space is colonized, and they have penal colonies, they have, you know, off-world, you know, mining colonies, they have space exploration in general, right? Now, I could do a story like that, and it could end up being something like Interstellar, you know, the Christopher Nolan movie, or it could be something like, you know, Gravity, you know, the movie with George Clooney and Sandra Bullock. But
I love that.
Yeah, I love those both. I love them both. But for Dredd, that's taking him out of his context. And there have been writers who have put him in space, and those stories haven't been as hard-hitting or impactful because he loses his scenario, right? Like, you don't put Spider-Man in Texas. Spider-Man works primarily in New York City, and there's a reason. Right. So I feel that the reason why some people have, and it's not disrespecting or putting down any other creators at all, but I feel that with Dredd, he works best on the ground in an investigation with the city pressing in. The pressure of Mega City 1 should always be like right around him. So in this case, I put a anti-immigration riot. That's the pressure of the city, and he's in an investigation. So that's all you need, because it's a cop story. And a lot of people, I mean, cop stories work best when they're doing an investigation. That's why Law and Order has lasted like 500 years, feels like, because Law and Order is very simple. It's like somebody did something horrible. Let's go and figure out how they did it and then put them in the legal system. So that concept is very simple for a police officer character, which is Dredd. He's still, at the end of the day, he's a police officer. So I like crime stories. I love true crime stories too. I grew up watching an old show called Unsolved Mysteries on NBC with Robert,
Yeah.
And then they moved it to Lifetime for some reason. But anyway, Lifetime channel. But the trick is, you have to simply look at the essence of the character. So like, for example, you have a Spider-Man book behind you. So
right.
That book, in theory, is sort of like Into the Spider-Verse, right? So in that, Peter, Gwen, and Miles Morales are in high school still. So I'm not going to send them fighting Thanos. They're going to fight Spider-Man villains and still have to do a test on Monday, because that's a scenario. So all you've got to do is look at things that people can basically relate to. In Dredd, it's an anti-immigration protest. In the Spider-Man book, Gwen and Miles have a test to take, but they still have to fight the Shocker. So how do you balance that? Because they're teenagers and they still play on their cell phones, but they're superheroes. So you have to just go to the basics. And I feel like another thing as to why people don't get it is that I think you need younger talent. And I don't mean younger as in their 20s, but you need talent who, I would say, between the ages of 30 and 50, who also diverse. And I just don't mean racially, but I also mean like diverse experience. Like, I'm from the working class. I was not born with a silver spoon. I wouldn't even know what that would look or taste like.
Right.
So I've worked hard. I worked retail for, like, when I'm 45 now, I'd say out of my 45 years of existence, I've worked retail for about 15 years, in some capacity. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. I've never been in a situation where I had something given to me. So I feel if I can take that idea and put that in there, like, because all my characters all are working, they're all they're hustling. Like, Peter's broke, Miles is broke, Gwen is broke, because, all of them have working class parents.
Which, again, it keeps it real in the sense of, for the reader, these are the average person who's reading it. So we can all, how should I say, relate to the character, as opposed to being, like you're saying, so off-world and so untouchable to us that we have no, we can't connect. Right. Well, and that's another factor. Right. Well, what I'm trying to say is that that's another factor, in the sense that this is my big point, is that if you have people trying to write about being broke who have never been broke, people trying to write about going to bed hungry who have never gone to bed hungry. I have. I know what it's like to not have dinner. So if you have somebody who's never lost anything or have ever struggled, trying to write about that struggle, it doesn't make sense. Like, I'm not a woman, obviously, right? I can write women characters, but there's things about being a woman I will never know or understand, and that's completely fine. So I'll do a certain amount of research. I'll make sure that character is well-rounded and not just a stereotype. But at the end of the day, I feel there's things about being a woman that I will never get. So there's certain stories I think are suited more toward a woman writer who can bring her real world experiences to those stories. You see what I'm getting at? So absolutely. For me, my background was working class, is working class, not was. I'm still I'm not like rich, I'm still, making the bills. I'm still, we all lost work. So I feel that if a reader can understand very basics of hustling and struggling, they can relate to my work, because that's all. In all my stories, I'm always putting in people who are always trying to get that dollar or have to make a choice, a hard choice that's moralistic against a world that doesn't have morals. So that's kind of the core of it all, if that makes sense. Oh, absolutely. And I think it really does translate to the reader. I know when we talk about this, especially with the Dredd, if we're able to have such communication, it means something to both of us, meaning it's something that we both can relate. Now, when we'll talk about the horror and the gore and stuff like that we read, but that's because we're able to allow our own minds to fantasize about things, and we're just spouting things that we're thinking about. but not living or experiencing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, dread stuff, or when we talk about things that really resonate with us, it's usually about, even though there might be fantasy experiences or fantasy, depicted
relating to the story.
Right. There's still aspects that we know are real life things that mean something to us. And those are the things that we talk about. So we found that in this book, in the sense of mostly dread for us. We found that there were things that really resonated with us. And I think it's to what you're saying. One, it was very easy for us to jump in. Two, it was very easy for us to get a feel of the world. Three, the subject matter, the way it was depicted, the way it was written, was things that we could either relate to or understand or actually apply to real world. So I think all that culminated into an appreciation for the story and for the book. Now, as opposed to that, and to, I guess, further touch on your own diversity, another thing that you work on that I really want to get back to with me, and we barely touched on, was Transformers. That stuff of my youth, that stuff that I introduced my younger brother to, that Mark and Powell. These are the things that I raised him on. So can you tell the community your how should I say, your work with Transformers, what you have coming up as far as projects with Transformers, all the way from film animation to book stuff, if you could? I know it's a lot, but we would love to indulge in it if you could. Yeah,
and I'm going to have to wrap it up after that because I have a couple of things to do, but I will be happy to talk about Transformers. So you can't see here, but I have a wall full of Transformers, including I have two very, very, very dear to me collector's pieces. I have Triptychon, which is the largest Transformer made to this date until that Unicron figure comes out. And I have the giant Megatron, which is like,
it's 3 feet, right?
Something like, I'm trying to figure out because it's like settling. I'll just see if I can show it to you real quick.
Yeah, I think the largest that they make is 41 inches. And
you see that Megatron right there?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in the corner behind that is you can see it as Triptychon. I've got quite a bit of Transformer stuff there, like a whole lot of Transformer stuff. So so that's what my office kind of looks like.
Car robots. That's how it appeared to me as a kid, and they're still cool.
What are they?
Like Transformers.
Oh,
car robots.
Car robots.
Yeah, that was a great show. I believe that was a show called. Yeah, it was a show called Car Robots, wasn't it?
I believe so.
Okay, so I was 10 years old when Transformers first came out. It was the fall of 1984. I remember it very clearly. It was a Saturday morning, and I had seen commercials, and a lot of people don't know about this, and particularly for anybody who's under, I'd say 30 or 35, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. But up through the late 90s, Marvel Comics did commercials for their comic books, and it was usually commercials for their Marvel licenses. So G.I. Joe and Transformers specifically had commercials for the comic books. And you can go on YouTube right now and look up the comic book commercials. I mean, the animation was very different, and they didn't quite look the same. Like the G.I. Joe stuff was cool, but the Transformers looked very, 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 very different than the cartoon we know, right?
Right.
So I saw the commercial for Transformers for the comic, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. I have no idea what this is because I always like giant robots, right? Even before got to know what they were. So I saw the cartoon, blew me away. Saw the movie in 1986 in theaters, actually, on opening day. I'll never forget it. It was August of 86, and I saw it on a Friday with one of my buddies. And that was one of the greatest movie-going experiences in my life to this day, literally. From then, I was a hardcore fan. I mean, I didn't really have a lot of money, so I couldn't afford to collect them. I mean, I had a couple of figures here and there, usually the smaller ones, because back in the day, there used to be a store called Woolworth, and they used to have
and Wilco.
Every Friday there would be a new shipment of toys. Every Friday after school, I would go to that Woolworth just to look at stuff I couldn't afford. And I would just go and stare. But I like the Bumblebees and the like Brawn and Huffer and Cliff Jumpers, like the little ones. They were only like about $8 or so. So sometimes I would have it, but like Optimus Prime.
Hey, you and I grew up the same way, and we so that's a lot of money. I mean,
right. Because $8 back then would be the equivalent of $20 now, you know, with inflation.
Absolutely.
Literally.
Yeah.
So like in Optimus Prime and Megatron and all those bigger characters, which had metal, where they had die cast in it, those were like $40 in the 80s. So $40 in the 80s is like $85 now, roughly.
Almost $100. Yes. Yes.
Pretty much, literally. So I spent a lot of time staring at boxes I couldn't afford. So go off to college, you know, I forget about Transformers for the most part. Until one day, and this is the craziest thing that ever happened to me. There used to be, back when the internet was starting, and I'm talking about like 92, 93, it was available mainly on college campuses. There was this thing called Deja, D-E-J-A, news groups. And it would be like rec.arts.toys.transformers. That would be like the forum, right? So if you clicked on it, you would just get, then we call them message boards now, right? But back then they were just news groups. That's what they called them, news groups. So I discovered the Transformers news group and then realized that as late as 93, 94, there was still a lot of fans who were all in college who could not afford them, but they still loved talking about it. And I found a community of people worldwide through those news groups that I connected with. Some people I still talk to this day. You know, that was 1993, 94, right? So when I discovered that, it reignited my passion for the characters and the toys and the lore itself. And then when Beast Wars came out, that was like 96 or so, I didn't like it at first because it didn't look or feel like the original show. But then in season 2 of Beast Wars, they connected with Generation 1. And that's when I really just went full back into it. And I started buying toys because at that point I was working. I graduated from college. I had a little bit of extra money. And since then, I've been, you know, into the franchise in every which way. And when I got to write a Transformers Armada comic with Dreamwave, that would have put it around 2003, roughly 2003 or so. That was like the biggest thing for me ever in history. Like I was actually writing Transformers characters' voices and stuff in the comic.
Yeah.
So that was dope. And after I broke into the animation game here on the Thundercats reboot in 2011 for Warner Brothers Animation, that led to me getting an episode of Transformers Rescue Bots, which was on the Hasbro
channel. I remember seeing those shows as a kid.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Those were my kid shows, technically, just because around that time I was like 7, 8,
right,
9-ish.
Right.
Exactly. And it's still going. Exactly. For every generation, there's been a new Transformers show, right? So I did that. And then jumping ahead a bit, I got to meet John Barber. I was introduced to him, who's the editor-in-chief now at IDW, but he was always a high-ranking editor at IDW anytime I'd met him, you know, the time I've known him. And somehow he offered me, I forgot how it happened, but he offered me a one-shot issue of Transformers Deviations, which is what if Optimus Prime didn't die in Transformers, a movie of 1986. And that was I got to rewrite Transformers, a movie, which was like a dream. And I'm not going to talk about the Michael Bay movies because outside of the very first one, I had some serious problems with the rest of them. I mean, Bumblebee wasn't bad, but you know, anyway, that's a whole other
story. No, I'm kind of there with you, but I get you.
So with that being said, the biggest Transformers thing that happened ever to me is I wrote 3 episodes. Or actually, I shouldn't say that. Actually, I don't know. I wrote some episodes of the new Netflix Transformers series called War for Cybertron, which will be, I think, coming out in June on Netflix. I think. I mean,
I think they postponed it into the beginning of July, from my understanding, but I could be wrong. Really? Also,
where did you?
I think so. I have. Well, and it was because everything was tentative. So I'm asking the community. You have to go in there. You have to do a little research. From my understanding, it was postponed another week later. So
okay, that would make sense because I haven't heard a damn thing about, you know, when that show is coming out, but I'm very much looking forward to it. So that was a huge thing. And I believe people at IDW read my scripts from the episodes I wrote, and they were like, wow, this is awesome. And then they were like, would you like to do some more Transformer stuff with us? I'm like, yeah. I mean, so I'm writing an Ultra Magnus story for the Transformers Galaxy series. So it's going to start with issue number 10, which was supposed to be out in June, and
Right.
I think that's been all pushed ahead to September,
August, I believe.
Well,
I think it might be August.
Issue 9 comes out in August, so issue 10 will be out in September. So it gives me a little bit more time with the writing because I'm not done writing it, but I'm pretty happy with what we've done, and I think people who loved the beginning of the Bumblebee movie, the opening sequence, and people who are going to fall in love with War for Cybertron, I think they're going to love what I'm doing with Ultra Magnus because it all kind of, in some ways ties together. So I'll leave it at that. And that's my performance.
We end it. I just want to recap by saying I think one of the experiences that you're having right now is almost a surreal one, right? Yeah. That you're able to work on this Transformers thing. So I know that you got things coming up as far as projects coming up. I know that because of our particular situation, things are being moved around. I've given you information about the new rescheduling on IDW on how they're releasing stuff. I invite everyone in the community to do the same. Go to IDW Publishing. They just released their scheduling on how everything's going to drop. I am going to right now ask Brandon if he could come back in a future date when all these things kind of massage themselves out and we know exactly how they're out, to come back with this when he has an opportunity to do so, and we can further talk about more of his books that are out and projects. So
first of all, I would love to come back anytime you would have me. I have absolutely no problem with that. It's just a matter of timing and scheduling. That's number one. Yeah. The other side is in terms of future projects, obviously Judge Dredd False Witness number 2 will be out sometime soon. I was looking at the calendar and I don't see it, but Marvel Action Spider-Man number 3 will be out on July 15th, it looks like. And I'm still waiting for more information about Judge Dredd, but I'm also working on Star Trek Year 5. We're going into the second year of that. So people should be aware, fans of Star Trek, and we didn't talk too much about it, but fans of Star Trek, the original series, I think would absolutely love what we're doing with this. We're wrapping up the original story, 5-year mission, and we're kind of making a bridge between the original series and Star Trek 1, the motion picture, because who they are at the beginning of that movie is not similar to the people you saw on the show. So we want to get to how did they become those people? And I feel that we've done it. I mean, it's not just me. It's Jackson, Lansing, Colin Kelly, Jody Hauser, and Jim McCann. It's all of us. We're all we're writers' room for Star Trek Year 5, and I think we've done a great job. So Star Trek.
We got awesome to work with. Writers. Yeah, it must be awesome to work with that group because that's a great group of people, man. Yeah. I would love to have all you guys on the show. Are you kidding me?
Hey,
my God.
You never know. You never know because we're definitely going to be promoting more of Star Trek Year 5. So if that's
great.
If that's something you want to do, we could definitely do a Star Trek Year 5 episode. So that shouldn't be a problem. I mean, I can't make any promises. I'll reach out to those guys and Jody as well and see what they think, and we'll go from there. So that's all I have to say. I mean,
I want to retouch on everything in the chat, meaning, hey, Just the Rican and his comics, Rod. I appreciate you being here. I want you to know that Rod is a big fan of yours, Brandon. He reads the Transformer stuff. He's the one that got me in the Transformers again. If without Rod, I probably wouldn't be looking at some of this Transformer stuff. He's got a great channel. Same with Metaphorical. Unstoppable Cockblocker, I want you to know that Kai and I just sent out your package yesterday. So we appreciate you watching. We appreciate everybody in the chat hanging out. We know we get most of our views on the rewatch. Please rewatch this. Everyone, do yourself the favor. Check out Brandon's stuff. He is everywhere as far as projects going on. And thank you, community, for watching. From us at
1-2
Comic Talk.
We will see you guys, community, later.
Yeah, later on today.